There you go.
Hello and welcome to the IMC Now, the Institute of Management Consultants, Northwest, Oregon, and Washington. We're glad you're here. This is our monthly speaker series, and we have great presentations for you today. Our board treasurer, Suzanne Lowe, will move us forward. Suzanne?
Thank you, John. It is my pleasure to welcome two people to this meeting and who are fairly new to the IMC. The first is Jeff Mays. Jeff Mays knows John, and I met Jeff too. He has an amazing background in so many areas, but his focus is insurance and business consulting. We have known Jeff now I have known Jeff now for a couple of weeks, and I'm impressed with his energy. Jeff is replacing Frank McShane as the IMC Now secretary, and he will be assisting through the board with the speakers series. So we'll be hearing more from Jeff, and we'll be shining the spotlight on Jeff later. We'll be hearing more from him and his speaker series. The second person I would like to introduce is April Salisbury. John and I
Are you okay, Suzanne?
I apologize. Somehow I blinked off. I don't know what happened, but you know, that happens with Zoom. April, John and I met last week, and I was so impressed with April. I was impressed with her background, her ability to grow a business, including her own. I was looking at her website and her profile on LinkedIn, and you can look it up too. She is very impressive. But during our conversation, I was most impressed with April and her commitment to customer service, customer care. And I would like to invite April right now to talk a little bit about her business, Salisbury and Company, her consulting business, which is very innovative. We can learn from April, and talk about her commitment to her customers. April?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate it. It's so nice to meet all of you. Like Suzanne said, my name is April. I'm the owner of Salisbury and Company. We have been in business for 7 years now, and we focus on small business management. So we have a section of the company that works at a high level with business owners and really takes over the business operations, financials, human resources, all of the things that business owners really don't understand, they don't know how to do yet. They're facing a lot of hurdles in growing their own business. And so they partner with us so that they can focus on what they're passionate about and continue to grow their business with someone, I guess, somewhat holding their hand and walking them through it so that they can learn along the way. Over the years, we have added additional services to focus on human resource management for small businesses. Most companies really it doesn't make sense for them to bring in a human resource manager until they have about 80 employees. So essentially what we can do is take that off the owner's plate or their spouse or friend's plate and make sure that they're in compliance and doing what they need to do to foster a really strong workforce. We also do bookkeeping and payroll for our clients. And then because most of us do have some background in healthcare, although we do not focus particularly on healthcare, we also do medical billing for some of our healthcare clients as well.
Thank you, April. I was talking to somebody this morning who recently or is in process of selling her business to an employee. And I was thinking, my goodness, you know, there's something that new business owner would be glad to know about, and that is your business and your consulting business and your services. So I have to say, I'm so glad you're with us, April, and Jeff, and I now return the meeting to John.
Finding the mouse. I'd like to talk about Dr. Brandon Hamilton and Tariq Masud. They are doing our 10-minute innovation talk today. Now, Dr. Hamilton is a systems architect specializing in organizational and performance improvement under the brand name Hamilton's Solutions Incorporated, a management and information consulting company. His boutique management consulting company provides organizational models and strategic frameworks for sectoral leadership, high performance, and sustainable competitive advantage. Dr. Brandon Hamilton maintains close ties with institutions of higher education as an adjunct instructor of business and technology. Now, Tariq Masud is a technology consultant. In his consulting with clients in the infrastructure industry, he has designed and implemented many end-to-end solutions for complex, multidisciplinary engineering and technology projects. The problems that he solves are related to quality, risk, compliance, and stakeholder management. The outcomes of his consulting work are various. They range from establishing new initiatives and programs that do not exist to overseeing the design and construction of brand new or rehabilitation construction projects, as well as directing the operational and productivity improvements in existing or newly established technology systems. And with that, I'll give the floor to Dr. Brandon Hamilton and Tariq.
All right, I'm going to share my screen and we'll operate off of my clicks, if you don't mind. This is the two of us here and our grandeur. So here's our title, how developing a relationship with SMC is a new title we created for IMC called the Student Management Consultants. We found that there are 37 new students that have joined IMC, and Julia and other people from the leadership style or the leadership side of IMC have asked me to collect these students and kind of help them feel comfortable with their membership. So that's what my friend Tariq and I are going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how you can use our student group to help grow your consulting firm. So in a sense, I'm going to focus though on mentoring. Matter of fact, Tariq is writing a manual about this because some of the current IMC members have asked me, they said, Dr. Hamilton, I like what you're talking about, but I've never mentored before. And so my friend Tariq is actually writing a manual for that. Okay, so as I said, it's for developing your company. But I want to call your attention to these high level value propositions. If you didn't know it, on the student side, they do know what I'm about to say here, that internships are the way to get a sample of what you want to do with your college education. But they're competitive. Sometimes companies find that they want an intern, but some other company makes a sweeter offer. They say, oh my God, I got a much better offer from Farmers Insurance. They're going to relocate me. They're going to give me an expense account, et cetera. Okay, so you need to understand that some are paid internships, some are not, et cetera. They're scheduled around the student schedule, not the calendar or your fiscal year. So there's fall, spring, summer. A lot of people just know about summer. That's very common for students, but don't be limited by that. I have some interns right now that are working with me from Brazil. They were able to get housing from their student government in the Loop, right outside of University of Illinois. Tariq is going to talk more about this, so I'm going to skip over this about the rotating and the one time. But think about this part. You know, as you are experienced, you guys are the seasoned consultants. There's an element of structuring this consulting mentor relationship, mentee-mentor relationship, so that you can help them emerge as consultants. Many of my PhD students ask me this all the time. You know, Dr. Hamilton, how can you help us start consulting? We're about to be experts, so we want to be consultants. You know, how can you help us do that? And so I help them structure that by creating a business plan and all the typical startup things. But as you all know, consulting is about relationships and building relationships. So we're going to ask you to consider being a supervisor and put together some kind of construct for the students. Work with my committee, if you will. And my last bullet here, there are universities that will offer credit for internships. Now, I am an adjunct, as John introduced, but if we have to put other of our PhD trained IMCs in there, we'll do that for you to allow for a credit class to go with the university, because a lot of students want credit about that. The way that I generally suggested to the universities I talk to is make it only 1 credit hour so that they can stretch out that internship instead of giving them 3 credits, which is common. I'm going to let Tariq take over from here now, if you don't mind. So Tariq, there you go. I assume he's here.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Brendan. Yeah, what I want to talk about essentially is in terms of the internships, we want to make sure that the students get some experience, as well as they offer something to the organizations that they work for. And we talked about amongst ourselves about what are the things that the companies can benefit from these students. The things that obviously we can't expect them to have that kind of experience and knowledge as you would expect from seasoned management consultants. But these younger people do bring in certain things that maybe some of us don't have. The biggest thing that I found, and I have 2 children, one, my daughter just graduated from Loyola University here in Chicago, and I found that these younger generation, the millennials, and I think the new generation, they basically are very good in the technology, the social media technology, and I think that's what they can offer to the organizations that they work for. So what we are basically looking at on the left side of the screen, basically the things that what we are looking for in those students, and then on the other side is what we thought were important factors for most of these students. They are definitely, we want them to have this experience of getting full-time employment towards the end, or good references, good networking opportunities. We want them to have a content-rich internship. Basically, what we are trying to develop, like Brendan mentioned, this guidebook for mentorship. We definitely will share that with organizations that are willing to take some of our students as their interns, whether it's a paid internship or an unpaid. That can be discussed, but basically what we think that these students need are opportunities which will benefit them and make them better when they graduate. So flexible work environment, this is something that Brendan talked about. We definitely we want to work according to their schedules because they have a very busy year. Again, decent compensation to cover their expenses. Those things again are very important to this younger generation, at least to cover their expenses. Then we want this our relationship with them to be a coach, not a boss. And I think this is also very critical with this younger generation. Most of us have children or working with them. They would definitely understand. So we want them to have some more independence in terms of how they work and how they contribute to you. So that's just something that we considered was important for both us as well as for these students.
All right, thank you so much, Tariq. So we finished about 4 minutes early because we thought that perhaps some of you might have some questions right away that he and I can answer. No questions.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, that's my friend from Texas. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we very much believe in the chapter, or excuse me, in SMC in Dallas. And we're actually working with Claremont College to introduce the program right now. We have another connection through one of our strategic alliances at the University of Texas at Dallas. And so they have the interns, they're looking for the positions. And what I was going to recommend, Brandon, is it'd be great if, this is a national project in my mind, if you had some kind of Slack page where we could post information. And so we have a conduit of interns. We're looking for opportunities to mentor. Today, through my calls to the Dallas Chamber, I identified a group, a nonprofit group that does something similar across the country. And so I reached out to them because there could be some synergies. And so so we're excited for your group in Dallas. We're hoping we can help any way possible. But I do think it'd be great if we had a Slack page and someplace where we could exchange information.
Fabulous idea. As a matter of fact, we're working on our website that is going to manage some of this, and that's one of the considerations we will certainly take. I see you there, Greg. I'll get you in a second. There is a newsletter that Joyce wrote, Joyce Joya. Some of you know Joyce. She wrote a newsletter article that is going to talk about this coming out very soon that will give you all the contact information of all my committee. Yeah, Greg, what's on your mind?
A couple of things. Now, will this be linked with the IMC USA webpage, your program?
Yeah, there's already some links there now. If you go into the drop down that says student membership, you'll see the 37 students, and you can, and if you click on each student, you'll see some of their background. And then there's a little bit that that Greg Brooks put on there that kind of relates to all the categories, because we've separated. You may have heard that we have a contest that we also sponsor for the best student project. Because one of the things that we didn't talk about here is we want to encourage our students to actually get so engaged with you that they work a project, maybe some of the low risk projects, and then they would submit that project to us, and IMC is going to give an award at the end of the year of the best student project. That student and the company that they work with, which could be yours, is going to be featured also on the IMC website.
I see a lot of parallels with a lot of people who've been employed and now are not. They leave the workforce, they're starting out on their own. I know that Chuck Roxton was talking about a few of his clients that he's coaching into the workforce who are now, they've taken that leap to be unemployed. And so I just see some of the characteristics of your program being applicable to people in the workforce that are not students, but they sure need that type of an intro.
Oh yeah. I think there are what 11 million jobs available. Only 4 million people looking.
Yeah, really.
It's a problem. Yeah, I just read an article this morning from McKinsey. I won't read the whole article, but it's called "How to Think Like a Kid," and it reminds you that kids invented the trampoline. Kids invented earmuffs. You know, when you bring young energy into your company, you'd be surprised at what you can get from that.
Sure.
Yes, I think we have as much to learn from the young as we may think we can offer to them. It may be actually unfairly balanced where we're going to receive a lot more.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I've got a big appeal from Northwest Washington. They want to bring some of my interns in to help them develop their website better, you know, and kind of work on some of their other local social media aspects, as Tariq brought out.
Yes. So there's a number of different universities we're talking with, including University of Washington and Eastern Washington University. And of course, we've had an ongoing relationship with the Atkinson's Graduate School of Management at Willamette University in Salem for, I don't know, 10 years or more. So yeah. This is going to grow. Someone had their hand up?
Vivek has his hand up. Did you want to say something, Vivek? He's on my committee as well.
I just want to make the point that we may think that we know everything and we have experience, but we may have some wisdom, but the knowledge base is changing every so fast. The half-life of knowledge is 4 years, not even 4 years anymore. and data is doubling every 2 years. And in that kind of an environment, we all have to think about always remaining current. I became an adjunct professor back in 2001, primarily to learn, not really to teach. And I think if we take that kind of an attitude with each one of our interns, I used to say to my class, I don't care whether you learn anything or not, I'm going to definitely learn something from you. If you can take that attitude, I think we can make IMC, which is becoming an aged organization, to be revived and remain more and more relevant in the 21st century. So,
Yeah, I think to your point, the younger generation, we have to keep their interest alive. And that is one of the things, like you said, you have to ask them what they are interested in, but at the same time, with the experience that, our mentors have, we may be hopefully able to guide them what is it that they should also look for. So it's a mix of the two. We will hopefully define the targets. We will also, one of the things that I am writing in the mentorship book together with yourself, in fact, as well, and is basically defining what is it that we want to achieve out of it. And when we have these project supervisors who are the people who are going to sponsor the projects for them, we want this to be a joint effort. We do not really want them to come up with ideas and that are not practical for the organization that they are interning with. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we give them targets and we give them some tasks. And then the next meeting that we have, this is one of the things that is challenging with the younger generation. I find it challenging with the younger people who join my organization. I give them tasks and we come back next week and it's not done. So basically, that is something that we are going to make sure, even though it's a short duration, 2 months internship or something, we are going to make sure that it is a learning process both ways and something that can benefit them.
Pat, you had your hand up. You want to jump in here? Trish?
Yes, thanks, Brandon. I wanted to, I'm sure we've used up the 4 minutes by now, but I wanted to bring us back to what Brandon had said earlier. He mentioned Joyce Joya, who heads up the Awards and Recognition Committee. Now, Brandon's work originally started as a part of that committee, and we're not even sure, exactly how everything is growing right now, but just hold the thought of awards and recognition. That committee is looking for 1 new member. So if you are interested, please get in touch with Joyce Joya, or Brandon or I could help you get in touch with her. Second thing, at that meeting this past week of that committee, we discussed the fact that the student part of the awards and recognition and building that student mentorship component is going to be going on at the same time that we're developing an ambassador program for new members of IMC, so that experienced members of IMC are going to be reaching out individually, not as mentors, but as ambassadors to new members of IMC. So one of the things we talked about is we've got to do this work together. It can't be, oh, we want you to be a mentor, we want you to be an ambassador. Oh, I can't do both. We want to do it in a logical way together. We'll, kind of make it flow so that everyone can do the part that they can do when they can do it, and that there will be opportunities for many people. And we do need every person to get engaged in some way. And that was my whole point of saying all
That's
this.
fabulous. Yeah. The more touch points that we can create, the more welcome these students are. Some of the students that joined during Consult Town are telling me they haven't heard from IMC. They're not sure why they joined, if they still want to join. But as I touch them one by one, they get all excited and say, wow, okay, this is why I joined. So I agree with you, Pat. The more we can engage what we're doing with what she's doing with the ambassadors and with the membership drives that are going on. And as I mentioned, encouraging them to sit for the CMC. Two of my doctorate students are really excited about going through the CMC process. So yeah, this is an all-inclusive community effort. Thank you so much for that input, Trish.
Thank you.
So I think that's it, John. We stole 5 minutes from you, but it was a great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next Inside Track speaker today hails from Longview, Washington. He is Frank McShane, founder of Square Peg Consulting and a supply chain cash guide. You know how many companies have trouble getting higher returns from their efforts because of supply chain, manufacturing, or people problems? What Frank does is guide companies using their own data to find cash in resilient supply chain approaches. The analysis and tools he helps put in place make it easier for companies to shift their focus to the most profitable customers and projects. He uses a whiteboard to clarify the key factors in his resilient approach. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Frank McShane at the whiteboard.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. I want to ask everybody to do two things. You go up to the upper right under your view to go to the speaker view so that you can be able to see the whiteboard okay. And secondly, if you're on, if you would please stay on mute. And if you have questions, put them in the chat area, or we'll get to them or hold them and we'll get to them at the end. So thank you. So yeah, we're going to talk today primarily about the B2B supply chain. Of course, the term supply chain has been in the news quite a bit these days. So I've got 4 objectives for today. One is we get a common understanding of what is in the supply chain, what makes it up. 2, we understand some of the common problems that are out there and things that you could identify with your clients as well. 3 is to identify some things you can do, some high impact activities that you can do with your clients to make a difference in their supply chain. And 4, we'll hit on this current situation to see, you know, what's the perfect storm of events that's occurring right now that's clogging up the supply chain. So I've got on the board here kind of a big picture of the B2B supply chain. And actually what we're going to see is there's multiple supply chains included in the B2B supply chain. We begin at the end here with our customers. Okay, that's where the pull and the demand for products or services comes from. If we back up into the scope of your client, so these are not necessarily all internal to their company, but it's their responsibility. There's a number of planning activities that take place in the supply chain. Could be anything from strategic planning, forecasting, production planning, order management, transportation planning, purchasing planning. All of those activities take place across the whole internal supply chain. There's the buy activities. Again, these can take place either on the front end where we're buying services or raw materials or parts and product to put into our product, or it could be at the far end where we're buying transportation services or warehouse services or distribution services, right? So buy cuts across the whole supply chain. There's the make function, which is in manufacturing, it's the actual producing of products. In services, it's really the preparation to deliver a service. So it could be in engineering where we're designing something that we're going to deliver. Or I worked for an internet service business. It was getting the trucks loaded and ready to go out and install. That would fall under the make process. And then there's the move process, which is from the end of production or the end of preparation all the way to the customer. Supporting all of that activity are the people and the teams that the client has in place. Okay, so we'll get to those in a little while. At the front end is the suppliers. So our products, raw materials, services are coming into the internal supply chain from those guys. There's two, as I said, there's multiple supply chains. At the front end, it's called the inbound supply chain, which is from the suppliers all the way up to the beginning of May. And from there on, it's called the outbound supply chain, which is from the beginning of May all the way to the customer. The picture is still incomplete, though. We need to understand the customer's customers. We're going to understand our supply chain and how to make it work better. We need to understand our customers' customers, because that's what's triggering their demand back into our business. And on this side, we really need to understand the supplier's supplier and what's going on with them. And this is where a lot of the current issues are taking place right now, where the supplier shut down because of COVID. And that affected this supplier who immediately provides us with products or services. So that's kind of the full scope of the supply chain. As you can see, it's pretty broad. If we start at the customer end, there's one problem that I run into a good bit with my clients, and that is they're not happy with the return they're getting from their customers. Volume is going up, they're expanding their business, but profit is not following at the same rate, right? And so one thing you can do pretty straightforwardly is we're going to do an analysis of the impact of the various customers on the business. And there's two ways of looking at that. First is the impact, and then the number of customers that have various levels of impact. And by impact, some people will use sales as the measure for that. Some will use gross profit, which is a little better. It's closer to the really bottom line impact of the business. The one I would prefer and recommend you look at is what's called cash contribution. So that's essentially gross profit minus the cost of serving each of those customers. And it tells us what's the cash left over at the end of the transaction with those customers. And what we're looking for here is who generates 80% of the impact on the business. Who generates the next 15% of the impact to the business? And lastly, who generates the last 5% of impact? Unfortunately, sometimes we find there's people that are down here generating negative impact on the business. That even though we have a gross profit, by the time we serve the customers, get the product or the services to them and get completed, we've lost money. So we want to look at that impact in a descending fashion and draw lines where we get to 80%, 15%, and 5%. The typical breakdown is 20% will generate 80% of the impact. No surprise, since Pareto was alive, that's been the case. You'll probably find somewhere around 30% that generate the next 15% of impact. And you may find up to 50% of the customers only generate 5% of the cash impact of the business. So that's typical. It doesn't mean it's good. It means it's typical. I have two clients, a large distribution company and a large food processor. And they have 9% of their customers that generate 80%, and 70% of their customers only generate 5% of the cash impact of the business, positive cash impact of the business. And so the problem with this is, as you can probably tell, we're going to end up spending way too much time and effort serving these customers and not nearly enough time and effort serving these guys up here. And our salespeople sometimes are not on purpose, but at fault, where they're out hunting for volume and getting paid on volume or getting paid on gross profit only and not cash contribution. And so they go out and find the easy customers to get, smaller customers or customers we carried on for years, and not hunting for these larger ones. And the reason this is so important is this relationship right here. These top group has 16 times the impact to the business that that bottom group does. So if you divide 80 by 5, you get 16. So we should be paying 16 times more attention to this top group than we are here. We should design our supply chain to satisfy these customers and work with these at the lowest possible cost we can. If you think of airlines, these are the first class passengers. These might be the business class passengers in the middle, and that bottom group are the basic economy guys in the back. But unfortunately, when you analyze this, we find that oftentimes we treat them all the same. And that's just like giving the first class food to the person in the last row in the back, right? So we want to avoid that. We want to make sure we've aimed our supply chain at these guys and our salespeople hunting for more of these people. So that's an analysis you can do, and you can add tremendous value to your clients by getting them aimed at these customers and more like them. If we come back into the supply chain in the move area, there's a lot to talk about in there, which we don't have time for today. Inventory, transportation, distribution, warehousing, etc. But there's one issue that I want to show you, and that's around shipping capacity. And particularly these days, with the shortage of trucks and shortage of shipping providers out there, they're looking for who can get me in and out of the shipping dock the fastest, right? Because the faster I can turn the shipment around, the more I can use my assets, and I can do more business. And so you can do a pretty quick analysis just going out to their shipping dock and looking at the time from the time this truck shows up until the truck leaves, and observe what's going on in that time frame. And when you're going to be looking for two things. What are the things that could be done prior to the truck showing up? That's called external activities. And what are the things that can only be done when the truck is at the dock? Those are called internal activities. And what you'll find is there's a lot of external activities that are taking place after the truck shows up at the dock. There's inspection, there's staging, there's cleaning of the product. All of these things that could have been done well in advance of the truck showing up are happening once it gets at the dock. And it's not unusual. You could actually cut this time. If you remove these external activities and did them in advance, you could cut this time in half. And what you've done is doubled the capacity, the shipping capacity of your client. Huge benefit. And if they go out and find more of these larger impact customers, now we can absorb that volume at no extra cost or less extra cost. So that's another kind of a straightforward one. In the world of manufacturing, lots of things can be done in there, but there's two I wanted to bring to your attention. The first one is called Tack Time. So there's a lot of confusion about that term if you're familiar with it. Some people think it's how fast you can make something. Actually, what it is, the literal interpretation of that is how fast do you need to make something in order to meet your market demand. I have a client, a medical device company. They were kind of a mom and pop, producing about 1,000 units a month. They're in the diabetes testing world. They got discovered by a distributor who provides product to big box stores. And all of a sudden their orders started to climb, and they had to get to 10,000 a month. So we needed to know, how often do we need to make one of these devices to meet 10,000 a month. Well, conveniently, if you look at one shift for a month, at 8 hours a day for a month, there's 10,000 minutes in a one shift operation. And we needed to make 10,000 units. So we had to have one pop out every minute. Right. And so that's important to know for your client to know, I've got to produce things, everything one a minute in this particular example. That means everything that happens leading up to that last step can't take more than a minute. Otherwise it becomes a bottleneck. Right. So you can go back and reshape the production process within that tack time. Whatever the tack time ends up being, the time which you have to make something, everything has to fit within that mode. All of a sudden, output will start to improve. The other piece you can do is look at, are they doing things in a batch mode, or are they using what's called one-piece flow? Sorry. One-piece flow. So if you think about it, a lot of manufacturing focus has been around efficiency, and that's driven this drive to produce batches, because for manufacturing they can make a lot of things and they get credit for that, right? But they make them in big batches, let's say 100 at a time. Then they go to the next step and they do the next 100, and then the next step and the next 100. But that first one is waiting for the rest of the 99 to get done before it moves to the next step. And then it has to wait again for the next 99 to get done. And so the cycle time begins to increase dramatically working with batches, and it limits the amount of throughput you can get from a manufacturing facility. So if you can cut the batches, hopefully down to one, where you do the step on the first one, move it immediately to the next one, do that step, move it to the next one. Back at the beginning, you're doing them one at a time and moving them, you'll find that the throughput goes way up. So we did that with the group that had to go from 1,000 to 10,000. We had all the steps take under a minute, and we did it with one-piece flow. And they were able to go from 1,000 to 10,000 and only added 2 people to their assembly operation to get that done. And it was really switching from batch to one-piece flow. If we back up now into buy, which is kind of the area of controversy these days, there's another analysis you can do fairly quickly with your client, and that is looking at how much are they spending with each supplier and how much choice do they really have for that item. And of course, we end up with the classic consulting 2x2 matrix. But what you'll find is that if you have suppliers where you're spending a lot of money with them and you don't have a lot of choice, so that's really a strategic partner. And the approach you've got to take with them is they need to know all this information back to what the customer is going to do in order to prepare to make sure you have what you need on time. And you can focus more of your attention on these guys. You can also find mutually beneficial arrangements around lead time, inventory, quality, delivery processes. And you don't even have to talk about price. You can reduce your mutual costs together. If you have a lot of dollars and a lot of choices, you got to make sure that the client is making those competitive. You know, they should be putting those out to bid on at least an annual basis. A lot of money at stake. There's a lot of choices out there. The problem I run into is that getting the client to open up their eyes about what choices they really have. They're comfortable with some suppliers. They may be local suppliers that they want to support, but they really have more choices than that, and they're not exploring them. Doesn't mean they have to change suppliers, but they ought to make it more competitive. The same thing goes on with these low dollar items where you actually have choices, like office supplies and you know, janitorial services and things like that that are fairly common. And each one by itself is not that much money. And what happens is the client gets kind of fat, dumb, and happy about and doesn't pay any attention to this area of the spend over here. And it just keeps going to the same people year in, year out. And they pass on a price increase and they just keep doing the business. Because everybody's focused on these larger dollar items up here. But if you add all this together, you find out there's actually a lot of money here. And so this one is another area we've got to make it more competitive in order to really drop down the total cost of doing business, not necessarily the price of the items, but the total cost of doing business. We want to make that as little as possible. And then this last one, if we've got small dollars, but not many choices, those are suppliers, you want to minimize the use of those suppliers as much as possible, including potentially insourcing whatever they're doing. Let's say it's a maintenance service of some sort. Down here, there's only one person anywhere in the vicinity that does that work, and they're charging you whatever they want to charge you. You may be better off developing that skill internally. So that's another thing you can do. You don't have to be a supply chain expert to do these analyses here. The last section is this around people and teams. And so for that one, it's really thinking about the roles that we want people to play. This is what I find a lot of clients don't do that we could help them with, is to think through what are the real requirements of the role you're going to ask somebody to perform. Too often what we find, and particularly in supply chain and manufacturing, is the leadership has been promoted from being the best operators or the best drivers or the best forklift operators become the supervisor. And that's the reason why they get promoted, not because they're a good communicator and they can effectively manage people and deal with issues and stress and all that kind of stuff. It's because of what they used to do. And that's a mistake. And so what you end up getting is you end up getting people in leadership roles who really aren't suited for that role. So the first thing is help them think through the roles. And the second thing is to help them think through what are the objectives that the team is trying to accomplish. In this case, it's really an execution strategy in the supply chain team. That's mostly what's being done. So you need people who have a sense of urgency, they're proactive, they're careful and thorough about what they're going to do, and they have a sense of urgency. They're thinking ahead, anticipating what's coming for them, and they're also collaborative. So that's another piece of the role and the objectives, is they got to collaborate together. This can't succeed if this doesn't succeed. Otherwise, we're just going to pump a bunch of product into an inventory and it sits in the warehouse somewhere. So we've got to think about what are the objectives, and do the personalities of the teams, as you put them together, do they match up to those objectives? And there are tools available to help do that. I work with one called the Predictive Index, one of many that are out there, but it's designed to help assess roles, assess individuals, and assess teams. So you can figure out, am I matching my team and my people to what the work that really needs to get done? So that's kind of the overview for today. So if you think about it, we've identified where we can make a 16 times impact by switching our focus to these types of customers instead of those. We potentially cut the shipping time in half and increase shipping capacity by 100%. We can increase throughput dramatically, not always 10 to 1 like we did in the medical device, but you can increase throughput dramatically by understanding how fast do I have to make something to meet my market demand, and trying to do it one piece at a time instead of a bunch of batches. Do that. And we've identified strategies to use with our suppliers so that we minimize total cost, and particularly our mutual total cost, because they're basing their prices on their total cost that you cause them to provide their product or their services. So we want to look at how to minimize that. That keeps you away from not necessarily having to negotiate price, other than in these very competitive areas, but particularly with your strategic suppliers, you want to look at ways to reduce the mutual cost. And then make sure to sustain any of those improvements, we got to have the right people in the right roles, and the teams have to be, the nature of the teams have to match the objectives that we're trying to accomplish here. Recently, a perfect storm of things have occurred in the supply chain. Demand spiked as shutdowns stopped and lockdowns opened up, et cetera, around the world. Demand spiked. People have been holding off buying and staying home and all those kind of things. All of a sudden, demand went way up. Meanwhile, these areas were impacted by COVID, where we're strapped labor-wise, particularly in the make and the move areas, and trucking is a shortage. Even manufacturing labor was a shortage, and that cascaded all the way back into the supplier levels too, where they were suffering from COVID restrictions, particularly overseas. So that became a big problem because they're much more strict in their lockdowns than we are. And so all of those factories in China, for example, were shut down to prevent the spread of the virus. And so all of a sudden there was this big gap in those suppliers providing materials, chips, et cetera, to our businesses. Here we're suffering mostly from in the domestic picture, we're suffering from a shortage of drivers, transportation capacity, with some restriction in manufacturing capacity too, just from individual plants, meat packing, et cetera, that got hit hard. But we can produce stuff. It's just getting it from there to the customer is the big challenge. I hope that helps. Give you a little bit of things you can do with your clients. You don't have to bill yourself as a supply chain expert to do some of this, and it's a lot of fun, and you can have a big impact. So with that, John, I'm open to questions. Do we have any in the chat room?
Yes, let's look at that in just a moment. I just want to thank you, Frank. That was an excellent talk, as always. And I want to also thank you for the time that you've spent on our board and the contributions that you've made to the IMC and IMC Now. And you've done a wonderful job. Thank you very much. And also to Jerry Fletcher. Jerry Fletcher, I've known and worked with for many, many years. When I was the membership chair many, many years ago, and now for a number of years, Jerry's been right there and helping. So it's been a wonderful board to work with you and Jerry and Suzanne, and we're going to miss you. We're missing you already.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate it. It's been an honor to work with you. Thank you.
Yes. And Jerry, I know that you know how much I appreciate your help and all the wonderful stories we've shared together at sitting in airports in Salt Lake City while the plane leaves and we're sitting in the bar, going to conventions and things. Now, let's start the Q&A here. Now, we typically close the meeting at 5, which is just at 4 minutes from now, but we keep the discussion open. But this way, people are able to depart. Now, there is let's see, I'm putting an announcement in the chat, and we're going to be having on February the 15th, our next event will be a guide to winning clients. It's a book by David Fields, and it's going to be an interactive inside track led by Mr. Tom Cox, our own Mr. Tom Cox, who's a member of our chapter. And there'll be an innovation talk on cybersecurity that'll be led by security expert Andres Gonzalez. So make sure to go to imcnow.org and register for that next event in the coming days. And of course, everyone will receive an email. Everyone who's registered will receive an email with a recording of today's talk so that you can really go through these points that both Brandon and Tariq and now Frank have made. So that chart is a wonderful chart. And I bet you there's that's only the tip of the iceberg, I know.
Yes. So there's a question here. I thought it's a pretty interesting one. Is it better to record materials when they're shipped or when they are received? And what are the challenges of each of those options? So I would take us back to our supplier analysis. If it's a strategic supplier, I would say you ought to take ownership of it as quickly as possible, right? So, and that may be part of the negotiation of that relationship is when does the ownership transfer and the responsibility transfer. For those where you have more leverage, where you can be competitive with them, I would keep the ownership with them as long as possible and off your books as long as possible. But again, if you have leverage, you may want to negotiate an inventory that they keep for you. This is what Toyota did to outlast all of the other auto suppliers this year from running out of chips. They experienced this thing when they had the earthquake in Fukushima, and they lost a bunch of suppliers at that point in time, and they realized that just in time wasn't going to be the answer for them anymore, and that they needed to make sure that those suppliers held an inventory for them. But Toyota's the big enough gorilla where they could say, you're going to hold we're going to commit to the inventory, but you're going to hold it until we need it, right? But when we need it, we want it.
Thanks for answering that, Frank. Yeah, I went through that when I was on the supply chain side of the space shuttle program. So all the materials that we needed for each launch, we always had to negotiate. So I love your answer.
Okay, we're going to go through some of the comments. Charles Sutton shared, I find that so helpful, the 80-20 impact. Thanks, awesome. And then, is it better to record materials when they are shipped or
that's the one we just answered.
Oh, okay, good. And then grades, let's see here. Frank, one of the best explanations of supply chain that I've heard in a long time. You are so right on, and I can tell that you're providing info that is only the tip of the iceberg. Okay, and then Patricia, concrete and succinct. Thank you from Patricia. And Mary Beth, wonderful explanation and intro to supply chain and issues. Now, okay, here's
John, you have a hand raised also, Greg.
Right. I'm going to just finish. We've only got a couple more here, and then we'll go through the hands. I have a question regarding people and teams. Have you looked at the cost of mentoring and training in leadership? You mentioned people are being promoted who don't add to the problem solving in operations. On the other hand, you mentioned the labor shortages. Could the training mentoring program be cost effective? What conditions need to be in place to effectively mentor leadership?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, I mean, training and mentoring is absolutely essential, but you've got to have the raw material there to work with. And that's, I guess that was my point, that people are being promoted based on other criteria, past criteria, not the future criteria. And do they have the orientation and the natural tendencies to become more of leaderships and take advantage of the training and mentorship? And some do, no doubt about it, but there's a many of them that I've worked with that just, you know, they were the best operator, and their approach is now going to be making sure everybody else does things the way they used to do them. And that's their approach to managing. And it's a very controlling kind of micromanaging type of a style. Very hard to change, even with training and mentoring.
Good point. Diane Gibson said, thank you for a very clear explanation of supply chain and tools that prompt great discussion with the business owner. Great presentation. Tariq, do you advise breakdown of jobs into tasks, some of which can be done remotely and others that need in-person presence?
Sure. I mean, unfortunately for the blue collar workers, most of them have to be at work. You know, there's certainly supervision, analysis, et cetera, can be done remotely, but if you're producing a product, it's got to be done on site. Services, maybe you could do planning and organizing remotely, but ultimately you got to be on the customer site to deliver the service if it's a physical type of service. So yeah, there's certainly opportunities to break things up. The concern I have is we end up with a two-class system of the people who don't have a choice to be, whether they can be at work or not. They have to be there. And how are they going to look at the people that have all this flexibility and hybrid opportunity? We got to make sure we don't create a schism there between the workers and the white collar group. A bigger schism than usually already exists anyway.
Yes, thank you. So at this point, I'm going to close our official.
We had Greg had his hand up. So,
Then we're going to go into the people
okay.
with their hands raised. And there's been a request from two people, Mary Beth and Patricia, if you could take a photograph of your board and put it in the chat.
Okay.
If everyone probably knows this already, but on your on the chat, at the bottom of the chat window, there are 3 horizontal dots on the right-hand side next to a smiley face. And those 3, if you click that, you can download, you can save the chat. The choice is the top one, which is save the chat. So this is an opportunity for everyone to right now take a picture of that with your own camera. Here, give people 1 more minute here. I want to get a picture of it too. Okay.
I just took one, John, which I'm going to send to you, and maybe you can.
Okay. Great. All right. So we've closed our meeting officially, and now let's get to the hands. This has been a wonderful talk, and now I'm going to close that. Okay, Greg, it looks like you may be first. I'm not sure, but go ahead, Greg.
I think I'm only one of the few that figured out how to put the hand up on the reactions.
Congratulations, well done.
Yeah, that was really good. I really enjoyed the presentation that Frank gave, because so many of these Zoom presentations, you've got your shared screen and it's all very interesting. But when you get someone up there actually making the diagrams and you're following through, I happen to pay more attention to that type of presentation. The first time I've ever seen that. So it was really a good presentation. And my question is, that bottom right corner there, I was going to ask you if there's ever a case for a loss leader. You've got activity and expenses going in for the bottom tier, not quite so good customers. You don't want to spend too much resources on those. When do you cut that off? I mean, is it worth it to have a loss leader? Do you get any business from that?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, just because you get them in these categories, you don't want to make any all one way or the other decisions, right? You still need to look at each one individually. There may be a new customer who's in that bottom group, but they're going to grow, right? So there's a possibility to get more out of them. They may be related to one of the 80% guys. We have in my distribution company, we got a bunch of those where they're actually related. We go, no, we don't want to shortcut those guys because they'll piss off the guy at the top, right?
Sure. Okay.
So there's still individual judgments, but at least it gets you to start thinking about them differently, right? Because you think about them in the first class, business class, economy class kind of mentality, right? So what can we do to really wow the customers at the top with service? What can we do to get the last guys on time safely to their destination? But that's about it. That's all they get, right? So, yeah. Hope that answers your question.
Very good. Enjoyed it.
Other questions? We open your mics, and who's got questions?
Not so much a question, John, but I think that's probably one of the best explanations that I've heard anywhere for a long time on the supply chain. I've been working in it myself for 50 years. And the one thing I can testify to is that 99% of the people who talk about supply chains haven't got a clue. And thank you very much, Frank, because I think you've opened a lot of people's eyes as to what's involved.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate it, John, very much. Glad to know you've been in supply chain. It's a good get your fingers dirty kind of a work, right? It's fun. Fun work.
I joke about it. I think I was born in a warehouse.
Well, we're all involved in supply chain. As at first, and when I've talked to some people, I would talk to them and I would say, is this person really involved in supply chain? But I'd say, this is good basic information. It's business information. And yes, it's going to apply to you. And then I'm like, well, I hope it does. But I think you're really bringing it out. And the idea about the labor and the materials, because every business is a combination, and the relationship that the service business is not that much different from the manufacturing in the way that it's conceptually, what are you building? You're right. You're building a meal, and here's your meal. So Diane, I bet you've got something to say about that with the work that you've been involved in, particularly the new job that you're working on. How do you see an angle on supply chain, or either that or on mentoring?
Well, in fact, the explanation of the process, I was just thinking about how to apply this to people and the people processes that are in every organization. The biggest one is communication. It's, and using some of these, just some of the questions that Frank presented, the diagrams, those could even be turned into questions. The 2x2 is you're right, a commonly used tool, but I think it really, I'm not a supply chain, I'm not involved in supply chain in the manufacturing sense, but it sure helped to understand just all the steps that are involved, and taking it not just from the supplier and the customer, but their suppliers and customers. So extending it out to really think about, you think about one box, one crate on the docks, and I don't know how many are out there now, that are waiting because of breakdowns and gaps in the supply chain. So no, it was very helpful.
Good.
And you might want to think of supply chain for an education standpoint. There's a customer out there who creates a demand to know and learn something. And this the process is interpreting that demand back into what can you deliver. And the educational process then becomes one of constructing materials, lectures, examples, et cetera, to be able to educate. And then all of those things are part of the education supply chain.
That's why so many universities have switched to adjuncts rather than full-times, because of the combination of the cost of fixed cost versus variable cost and the benefits. So
when they pick adjuncts that are experienced in the fields they work in, they're doing well. When they pick adjuncts because they're educators only, they lose.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, John.
I had an experience in all of this, Frank, with Ben and Jerry's ice cream.
Yeah.
Ben Cohen and his partner, they're great guys, but their inventory is rather challenging. All these various materials that go into their very unique brands of ice cream. And a lot of what we did is based on what you walked about today, is trying to see which one of the products were drawing the most profit. And it was a challenge to them, because there were certain ones that were very popular with their customers, and they wanted to push those out, but it was like there was no return on that, so they had to move their marketing team to move the marketing messages to get to that 80% group that you mentioned.
Very good.
My other experience with that is when I was working on my PhD, I studied apparel and the whole fashion industry.
Oh, wow.
And challenging, as that every season there are new products and new styles, new colors. And my favorite, I studied 28 companies. My favorite company was Benetton, color the because they had the best just-in-time inventory system of all the ones that I studied. They waited exactly until they knew what the customers wanted, and then they colored all of their materials before they sold them.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
Interesting experiences. Yeah.
You bet.
Tom Collins, you've been silent. What's your experience in supply chain and mentoring?
Nothing worth talking about. I've been taking notes and paying attention.
Okay, great. He's out in the woods.
Yeah. One thing I was going to mention to build on Brandon's comment, that it's so important to get to that 80% group, and you want to make sure you know those customers inside and out. We should be contacting them on a regular basis and knowing what's happening in their business, what's happening with their customers, because that's what's going to drive your business and the decisions you have to make. And it's just a benefit to be able to narrow it down to the small group that really makes the biggest difference. you don't have to keep up. The food processor has 714 customers, but they really only have to pay attention to about 65 of them that are going to drive the business, and they can be close on the others. And the last 5%, which is 450 customers, by the way, they can ignore them almost, and it doesn't really matter. They don't have a big impact on the business. Matter of fact, we're getting rid of about half of them. And if we do that and add 10 customers on the top group and 20 in the middle group, they'll add $33 million to their sales line with 60% of the customers they had before. So it's a real case of more is not more. More is less in their case.
Robert Snyder, turn your microphone on and jump in here.
Well, I missed 6:30 to 7, so I missed the majority of his talk. Looking at his whiteboard, I recognize kind of a 5 forces thing going on.
Get out of the way.
You know, customer, your customer's customer, 1 degree of separation. Where I work factory metaphors and supply chain into my work is that in innovation and in project management, every team is a factory. And at the most abstract level, you know, dysfunctional teams are disagreement factories. Healthy teams are agreement factories. And
Sorry.
I'm flattered. So I do think that documentation, although it's out of favor, a documentation factory, this conveyor belt of 5 verbs, is valuable because everything that we do, if you want it to be valuable 1 or 2 years from now, it's got to be documented, right? Companies cannot talk their way to success. You cannot email your way to success. Documentation outside email is this valuable factory. You just need to know what to document, and then everything you do is worth those 5 verbs: draft, review, revise, approve, distribute. And I can standardize my whole project plan with just those 5 verbs. So this is the factory, this is my supply chain that I try to standardize so that, because a lot of companies, a lot of projects, they suffer from what I call verb sprawl. Have any of you seen a project plan or a public task list, a dumping, or I see Tom smiling. And if someone has a fun experience of like a nightmare verb sprawl, I had about 5 years ago where I came up with this term verb sprawl. An outside consulting firm came into my employer at the time. I was in his business PMO sales innovation role. And this guy presented his project plan to me. And, you know, I knew more than enough to be dangerous to him, right? And he shows me this project plan that had maybe 120 lines in his project plan with 40 different verbs.
He had a well-thumbed thesaurus.
There's a time and place for your exotic vocabulary. Project plan's not that place. And so you build a project plan to reduce risk and improve predictability and improve transparency of work. Well, when you manage with 5 verbs, you really hit the high risk points of your project, because it's the stuff worth documenting, the stuff worth collaborating on, the stuff that's like worth approving. That's valuable because everything else is talk. And so I think the 5 verbs can really do a lot of good damage. It can take you really far. And so I love supply. So not only would I love to work in traditional supply chain, work on, you know, the last mile of disaster recovery. I'd love to work in this world after my current projects and book is done. But in the meantime, I just love these concepts, and I love to absorb from Frank, Brandon, Tariq, et cetera, because this concept of a factory helps all innovation teams to reduce reinventing the wheel, because so many project teams, how much reinventing of the wheel is going on with things like verb sprawl, you know? So anyway, I can go on and on, as Tariq knows, so I'm gonna hit my pause button.
Well, thank you for sharing, Robert. Thank you for joining us and sharing. And, you know, that's the wonderful thing about our community of practicing consultants. We've all got a a lot of stories, a lot of stories, and it's encouraging and to get new viewpoints. I was a little bit wondering whether, what I would get myself from today's talk. And it's wonderful because it all comes into like project management and how does a project, start and move to completion, who are the suppliers, who's the customers. And it's a wonderful model. But when it gets into large companies like how you work for Fiber, the most complex paper manufacturer in the world or something, and one of the largest in North America and the world, when you're cutting down trees and dealing with real stuff,
Yeah.
not just the version of a tree we call, we used to call paper. But now we call emails and documents. But excellent view and interpretation there, Robert, to give us. And this all goes into the mentoring and the engagement of youth, or just a wide diversity of how do we keep our companies functional and how do we keep our organizations healthy and productive.
John, you've got another hand up with Greg.
Oh, yes. So Greg, yes, please.
Yeah, I just wondered in this project that you talk about this process, Frank, where does inventory fit in on this, and what have you seen changing with just in time all the way to the blockchain and the ID stuff? Even one, Christoph asked about the impact of AI, artificial intelligence, in operating the flow of inventory, and what have you seen changing in that world?
So one thing that's changing, we used to be under the just-in-time kind of philosophy here over the past 25 years or so, mostly driven by Toyota. But with the recent events, you're going to see inventory build up, right before the make process begins. So we have something to do. So back with our negotiating with our suppliers, either they're going to hold it for us and can get it to us very quickly, or we're going to hold it ourselves. Maybe we pay for it then, maybe we pay for it later. That depends on our leverage with the supplier.
Okay.
And then in the move area, that's where traditional finished goods inventory resides, is in the move area. So it could be in a warehouse, it could be on a dock at a distribution center. And that really leads us back to those customers. What is the right amount of inventory to meet their demands? How much leeway do we need to give ourselves and them as their demand fluctuates? So we need that cushion. That's really what inventory is. It's just an investment in a cushion against unpredictability.
Yeah.
And so the closer we can get to those customers, the less inventory we're going to have, because the less unpredictability we're going to have with those particular customers.
Okay.
But I think just in time is going to change quite a bit to just in case of some sort, at least it depends again on the choices and how easy it is to get the products from the suppliers. But where there's risk involved, there's going to be more inventory investment.
Frank, we've been talking a bit about just in time. You must have some solid experience and some reasons for just in case inventory as well.
Yes, absolutely.
You might want to bring one or two of those up for.
Well, just like I said, in the current times, people, like the chip shortage was generated by a just-in-time philosophy, where those chips, which are expensive, that's one of the most expensive things you can put into a car, are those chips. And they were used to having them delivered just as they needed them. Same for, Dell computers and all those people that had those just-in-time inventories. But all of a sudden they weren't in time, and they weren't even going to on the horizon. And so I think they've learned that what they saved in the cash they freed up from the just in time didn't account for the fluctuations going on in the real world. And that's what's going to change. I think there'll be a more, again, it's going to depend on the leverage with the supplier, whether they keep the inventory on hand and pay for it, or they keep the inventory on hand and commit to it but don't pay for it, or the supplier keeps the inventory on hand for you and can get it to you very quickly when you need it. but somewhere in there, there's going to be more inventory back and forth.
There's going to be a new balance.
A little more balance, you bet. Right.
Here's a question from Christoph Obrecht. Question for Frank. I wonder how much you know about or see the introduction of AI as a tool for analysis and possibly process management in the supply chain. I ask because I work in a warehouse, and over the years, I have seen places where the human element could be reduced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, that's probably the biggest level of activity of AI is in the warehouse and distribution, both outbound supply chain and returns and those kinds of things, where things are coming back in and being put back into inventory. So having robotics and AI assisted equipment, managing that flow, picking up the data, knowing exactly what it is and where it goes. And yeah, what's happening is the old line workers are going away, but the maintenance workers and the technicians to maintain all of that is growing, both on the IT world and out on the shop floor with the actual physical maintenance. As far as analytics go, there's been a lot of work on that, mostly in terms of what I would call supply chain visibility over the past number of years. But as far as getting actionable decision support kind of things, that's probably lagged a little bit behind. So I think there's still a lot of opportunity to improve that. Taking all this activity that's going on all the time, from the demand all the way back up to the supplier level, and tying it together so people can see what's really happening, see what the trends are changing, make adjustments, make decisions. That hasn't been tied together quite as well as it could be.
Well, Tariq has a comment. Tariq is a civil engineer, and Tariq said, I find many project managers are not even preparing a project plan, as they, quote, think, unquote, they can run the projects by the seat of their pants just because they think they have so much experience.
Yeah.
Tariq, do you want to, are you still with us, or have you, maybe Tariq, I don't know.
He's there.
He's there.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to kind of comment on that because, I do see a lot of projects, people are not even preparing a plan. They think that each project is going to be the same. Whereas, as Frank mentioned, there are so many changes that are happening, and, the assumptions that you have, that were correct at one time may not be correct now. So I think that is one of the things that I always advise, to the clients, always look at the current situations and then adjust your plan. And that is a very essential thing, regardless of which industry you are in.
Yep. Plan, do, check, act. That's the cycle, right?
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Patricia. Oh, that was a wave of goodbye. Well, Patricia,
goodbye, yeah.
Patricia, let's see. Mary Beth had said a non-business just-in-time concern was TP inventory. I shop at Costco, so toilet paper.
Yeah.
Shop at Costco, so had supply. And Patricia commented on that comment saying another 2 times 2.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and we can go to closing remarks, and we'll go around the room who has closing remarks, and you can save the chat because there's lots of contacts and people have they have websites and various contact information. So you might want to, everyone, save your chat before we close. When we close, we shut it down so that we can begin the recording process. So we can upload the video to the YouTube and then send a link out to everyone. So this is a time for closing remarks. And Frank, you can go last. Frank and Brandon can go last, or you can go first. It's up to you too. And Tariq, do you want to go? You want to go first, or you want to go last?
I am fine, thanks. I just put it in the chat, and I was very impressed with the presentation. Great presentation, Frank. I think you bring in several points that we can really take to any industry that we can think of. This model really works everywhere. It's not just limited to manufacturing. I can think of it applicable in my industry, even though we have long-term projects. There are lots of things that are not being done because, like, for example, in segmental bridges, we have to place the order much in advance, and it's not happening. So, this model that you presented and how to be in just-in-case inventories, it applies to even our industry as well, not just manufacturing. So thank you so much for presenting it. Thank you.
Yeah, so just FYI, Tariq works in a large engineering firm. And what's the size of your typical projects that you're?
We basically have these, pretty much everybody who is on the call here has used something that we have designed and built. We basically do bridges, roadways, infrastructure, even in the Northwest in Seattle, the Sound Link, the transit line that you have, we have been working on that. We work on projects that are infrastructure, land, as well as airways and, the trains, roadways. That's basically what we do. So these are long-term projects that are mostly government sector projects with taxpayers' money, and there are just too many aspects to it, very complex. So that's part of what we do.
And I want to call Mary Beth. Mary Beth, you've been silent so far, and Mary Beth is a real leader in the Chicago chapter. Tariq and Brandon are also from Chicago.
And so is Robert and Vivek. We had 6 people from Chicago. That last
Me too.
special listing I saw.
Patrick Locke is calling from the background here. Patrick Locke, our Zoom master.
Yes, I'm from Chicago.
Well, I've lived in Cook County my whole life. All my education's Cook County.
All right.
Sometimes work in Lake and DuPage.
Really.
But I only speak when I have something additional to add. So I listen and absorb. And I concur with Mr. Tracy that this was a wonderful presentation, laid out so well. It was seamless and understandable and gave us really the highlights and overview. And I liked what Robert said about the 5 verbs, and that dovetails with what I do. I like people to be effective, process, policy, and procedures, and I'm the geek who likes to write. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mary Beth. And I sent you an email a couple of days ago. I'd like to schedule a talk with you, but we'll talk about that later. So Diane, what would you? I'm so glad that you're here. And I almost called you over the weekend, and I was reaching out to your compatriot, but I didn't want to disturb you guys on a weekend, although I never usually let things like that stop me. But what do you have to say? Or
I don't have anything new to add. I really appreciated the student management, I forget the acronym, SMC. Student update. That is really a cool project, and it seems like it's got a lot of traction. So I was very excited to hear about that, because I worked early on with you, John, with, was it Clark College?
Well, let's see. I think it wasn't it Willamette? You were going back and forth to the events.
I don't think it. Well, yes, there was some with Willamette, but there was some with the college in Vancouver.
Yeah, Washington State. Washington State. Yes, it was you who got an evaluation by the students of our chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, excellent.
Anyway, so I was excited to hear about the updates on that project. And Frank, I just really appreciate the very succinct steps that you took us through to explain supply chain. I mean, I get it. I mean, from your explanation, I'm not an expert, but I get it. So
Yep,
thank you
thank
for
you.
that knowledge.
You bet.
Yeah.
Frank is very thorough.
Yes, he is.
He's very thorough, very organized, who helped me a lot.
Radical.
Robert, do you have some comment, some parting words you'd like to share?
I'll throw another fun metaphor out there real quickly, just like, even though your company is not literally a factory, you want all the same things, speed, quality, waste, etc. Even if your innovation team isn't literally a symphony, you should manage it like one.
Oh.
Synchronization, right? Factory, symphony, you want all the same things. You want attention to detail. You want balance among the woodwinds, the brass, the strings. You want reliability, that people show up to rehearsal. You don't want to rehearse just until you get it right. You want to rehearse so that you're actually unable to fail. Muscle memory, second nature, that's automation. And so the cross-pollination with the performing arts can be another really valuable, profitable metaphor. Factory, performing arts, there's a lot of value there. So I'll just place that bookmark in everyone's mind for another time.
Wonderful. That's, wow. I love that. I love that. And then, so John Tracy called me today, and he was bumping up against getting in or something. And then we start trading stories, and he's from New Jersey. And I said, oh, I went to school at this school, and he taught at that school, so I'm sure we're going to have a half a dozen conversations here in the next few days, John Tracy. And that he reminded me, oh yeah, John, we met at the conference X number of years ago. I'm like, oh, right. Okay. Wonderful, wonderful. More stories. So, John, what are your parting wisdom questions?
My thoughts, I think I'm pretty well laid out. Frank just done an excellent job of explaining supply chains and systems. I've had a lot of experience in the field. As I said, that's been all I've done, basically. And I've worked for, if you use the old SIC codes, I think it's 96 of them, which puts me into almost anything and everything. And I can tell you there's no such thing as no supply chain. Everybody has one. And I don't care how small or minute or whatever, it's there. And Frank has done a great job of laying it out. There's another element that's in there. We just started to tap on that a little bit. That's the just in case. We have all shifted to just in time. We all think that's the way things are. But I do remember working for a shipping company one time where the accountants had knocked out some of the inventory and scrapped it because things like crankshafts were too expensive to keep in inventory. And when the ship tore a crankshaft, destroyed it, and they had to have it rebuilt, it was 2 years. So they mothballed the ship and scrapped it and went out of business.
Wow.
So inventories count.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Brandon.
Well, yeah, thanks, John. I'm gonna wrap it up this way. I went through 2 PhD experiences. My first one was a PhD in educational leadership. My second one was in business. And when I bring the two together, when I was doing the PhD in education, I was concerned about how a university chooses what classes to offer and which degrees to present. And I started to realize the sensitivities of even adding one more extra hour to a degree, the enrollment would drop down. But I took the whole look of that whole thing of courses and classes and degrees as products of the university. And later in my life, as I got the doctorate and then started consulting, I started the doctorate in business and then consulting, I started to also look at the students as products of the university. And university deans that I've talked to and presidents and provosts have shared with me, the ones that know what I'm doing here, they've shared with me that they are struggling now with that original question of which courses and classes and degrees to offer because their students aren't getting employed. They're graduating. When I graduated with my first degree and second degree, the average debt level was about 20 grand. It's up to about 70 and 80 grand now. These students are graduating with debt and they're not getting employed. So they expressed to me how excited they are about what IMC is doing. They said, you guys are the perfect bridge that we need to work with that can create a pipeline from education to employment. So that's my parting thought. If I didn't make that point clear to you, think about it now. They really, really need us and they're very excited about us. So the more we can deliver on that, I can see our membership going up. I can see like Julie and I talk about a new evolution of the even strategic planning for IMC into what we do in the future. So thank you very much for inviting me, John, and thank you very much for the questions and conversations. It was great.
I want to throw out a challenge to all of our members and non-members, but it's what Patricia was talking about the ambassador program, because the mentoring of students has a corollary, and that corollary is the ambassadors who support all of our members and really work with individual members in what their venture is and how can they achieve the success they're looking for through the IMC. So I think that our efforts with the students are of crucial importance. That's why I'm on your committee and involved as I am. But there's that second part that started being mentioned today about, well, what about the people who are not students? Christopher Obrecht here on our call today with these is working in a warehouse, and he'd love to be involved. I know he would, but he doesn't have a practicing consultancy right now. But there's many people who we can help with that same kind of mentoring and some version of internship for people who are no longer students or not yet students. That's my parting challenge. Frank, Mr. McShane, thank you so much. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. And what are your parting thoughts?
Yeah, well, thank you. First, I sent you a picture of the board, John, so we can send that out. I texted and emailed it to you. So you can send that out with the links to the recording.
Yes.
But just appreciate the chance to talk about something that you can tell I'm pretty passionate about the supply chain and what the potential is. And I see it as a cash generating function, not just a cost center. And so that's what gets me excited about it, is it can really make the difference in a business. That whereas sometimes it's hard to find something like that so concrete that can make that big a difference. So
absolutely.
So thanks everybody. I really appreciate the comments and the attention you guys paid and all the nice things you said. So thank you very much.
Well, two more people. Christoph, can you turn your microphone on? Or have you escaped for a cup of coffee or a glass of wine? Jeff Mays has come back in. Hi, Jeff, or has turned his camera back on. Okay, there's Christopher. Go ahead, Christopher.
Really enjoyed your talk, Frank. That was really interesting. Working for the big truck manufacturer in Portland for many years, that really hit home. Great information, thank you. And so excited about the student information that's coming to us in the future with that. I'm excited about everything. Thanks so much, everybody.
Jeff has got some incredible stories about fire trucks and selling 18-wheelers, and I always get amazed when he starts rolling out, and I'm like, you did that? So let's turn here for a moment to Christoph. So Christoph, that was a great question about AI and the future of AI in warehouses and supply chain. Thank you for participating and commenting.
Yes, thank you to everyone for the input. I found it very informative especially Frank. The thing I wanted to say also was that as I have become introduced to this IMC, that I'm very intrigued and look forward to learning more and getting to speak to other individuals, and who knows what the future holds.
Amen. Ho. All right. Great event. Patrick Locke, thank you. Patrick, what are your closing comments?
Well, I just really want to thank Frank also. I think you did an absolutely great job. And just opening our minds to expand what you're saying, it applies to just about everything you can imagine out there. If you look at it in such a way that whatever you're doing requires all of those elements, and we can apply it to just about anything. So I really thank you for bringing that out in that manner that takes it across the board.
Sure, appreciate it.
Well, adieu. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you. We'll see you February the 15th for Mr. Gonzalez on cybersecurity and Mr. Tom Cox on Mr. Field's book on winning clients. Talk to you in the coming weeks and days. Bye now.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Christoph. I'm glad you kept stayed in here with us. So I can't hear you.